Hey everybody, I'm just putting something out there. This was an incident that happened, I forget the date, um, early to mid January. One of those things that it's weird, but your mind kind of comes back to them, and eventually you say, well, wait a minute. There's more going on here than I thought. And so I'm putting this out there to, just in case. Hopefully this doesn't need to be looked up, but I want it in cyberspace just in case. The condo building I live in here in Thailand, um, 4 story. I live on the second floor, and some months back there was this real asshole living on the same floor. I wasn't the only one who was complaining to the building staff about how much of a loud asshole he was. But here's the thing. I thought it was because, and granted, the sound dynamics on the hall that they really carry. You got the door open to your room, you're heard by the whole damn hall often. This guy would not only do that, but it'd be particularly loud about it. But one thing I kept hearing coming from his room or area that I had presumed was just him talking to somebody on the phone was the phrase, quote unquote, fucking Jewish bitches. Um, I'm a real Palestinian supporter. I don't like the state of Israel at all, but the fact that he was saying Jewish rather than Israeli or Zionist made him sound like a Nazi fuck. Um, and I know I had personally at least once, might have been twice. Um, and I know other people on the floor had confronted the guy, and said, "Hey, man, shut the fuck up." We wouldn't, and he just gave us the finger, would go, next day tell the building staff, like, you need to tell this guy to shut up, or kick his ass out. And so one day, I'm just kind of outside of my room, and he's like wandering, like back to his room. He's not talking to anybody. He's by himself. But headed back to his room, and he says the same thing. He just exclaims, and keep in mind this guy's got an accent that sounds kind of Slavic. And just yells out, "Fucking Jewish bitches," again. At that point, I'm like, okay, I've had enough of this shit. And I call him out. I'm like, hey, you know, I said, hey man, look, I don't like what Israel's doing either. When you say Jewish, and not Zionist, or even Israeli, you sound like an anti-Semitic asshole. Knock it off. Um, and this motherfucker proceeds to just go off on me, just yelling at the top of his lungs. Pretty much anyone who was home, who lives on the hall, came out to see what the hell was going on. Now, the good thing is that the building family kicked this motherfucker out a couple days later. And but his voice was going up to 11. Now, granted, I can match that if I want to, but when I realized that everybody was coming out of their room, and I'd say the residents on this floor are about half foreigner, half Thai. They were coming out to see what the hell was going on. They were realizing what kind of a asshole he was being. So I just kind of looked, looked at my, just kept the eye contact. Like, that's the best you got. um, but looking back, so okay, one asshole gone. But looking back on it, there's some weird shit. That like was right there in front of me. Granted, but I hadn't really put it together. Um, First of all, because this guy's room is several doors down the hall from mine. He was near his door, and I was barely outside of mine when I heard him do it, and I called him out. Um, and he proceeded to come a lot closer during the yelling and stay there. But he didn't quite get into my range. It's like he stayed at like that 4 or 5 foot mark, okay, such that I couldn't have sucker punched him. So to have that I mean, like I said, this guy was speaking at volume 11, yelling at volume 11, I should say, and screaming, um, but yet had the wherewithal to know the distance. That's suspicious. Um, Second thing was that I forget all of the rant you went on. You ran on. I mean, you tend to remember the tone more than the words, but I did remember some of the words. And the first thing he started going off on me for was that I, quote unquote, had no respect for international law, unquote. Which is just kind of weird, because when it comes to an issue like, the massacre that Israel's committing in Palestine, um, you don't go to the legality first. You go to the fact that people are getting killed. And when I look back, it's like, that's not the language of the oppressed. I was talking with a buddy back in the States recently who was letting me know that there had been some incidents. And this is before I had told him this incident, that had happened to me, which I shared soon after. But somehow I forget even how the topic came up. But had been telling me that there'd been some cases in the U.S. of some Jewish students with ties to Israel, like at the very least a birthright trip, if not more. Had been busted like painting swastikas and things like on their own car. Oftentimes it was. He was telling me that oftentimes it was a Jewish student who lived in a dorm on a hall, with some Muslim or Arab students, hoping the cops would go looking at them, and they didn't know there was a security camera that actually caught it, and realized they did it to themselves, hoping to try and get somebody else busted. So when I look, when I took that in and I started thinking back, putting all together, and I even had this passing thought then, but I thought I was getting a little too paranoid. But now with all this other info, and that I think about my friend's story, I'm like, how suspicious this guy was in fact an Israeli. I can't compel the building to tell me what nationality was on his passport, and even if I could, a lot of Israelis are, dual either U.S. or U.K. citizens, so odds on being able to find that out are pretty slim. But that's what I'm thinking. The guy had the conscience. Was just screaming at the top of his lungs, yet had the consciousness to maintain distance. He started off ranting about the legality rather than the humanity. It's the language of the oppressor, not the oppressed. This all points to, on like the Palestinian activist circles online, if you're ever in like any groups, that they have a very strict no anti-Semitism policy, knowing that pro-Palestinian Jewish voices are very powerful. So it all adds up to this guy. Like I said, I can't prove it, but all adds up to this guy being an Israeli trying to make pro-Palestinian people look crazy. Like, this was months ago. The guy was uh, kicked out of the building. I think he's gone from town, at least. Maybe all of Thailand, I hope. Um, but when I look back on it, yeah, this guy seems like some sort of plant. And I get as many hearing this, I do rock a Palestinian flag on my profile. So, yeah, it could have been a target. I mean, seems a little weird. You can't really brag about that now just because Palestinians are still being massacred. So, us pro Palestinian activists have all been complete and miserable failures, let's face it. Um, but, yeah, I feel the need to put this out there just so that it exists in cyberspace if anything weird happens. Later.